I want to move on with some of our briefs here. So we're gonna stick on crime, and we move to Indianapolis, where despite howls to the contrary by President Trump and Attorney General Todd Rokita and the Republican mob, new data reviewed by Axios shows violent crime is down significantly year over year. In that time, homicides are down 22%, robberies 15%, aggravated assault down 22%. Non-fatal shootings are down 16%, and overall violent crime has decreased 20%. And when you compare it with 2021, murders are down a whopping 55%. Again, all these folks with all these guns for their protection, fear of crime. Well, crime is down. In the next story, I'm going to stay in Indianapolis. On Wednesday, an overflow crowd saw the Indianapolis Local Education Alliance, a group we've talked about here before, created by legislators to coordinate the relationship between public and charter schools in the state capital. They introduced various proposals to modify the overall structure of public schools in Indiana's most populous municipality. And here I'm going to quote extensively from the story in Mirror Indy. So Mayor Joe Hogsett brought 4 different ideas to the alliance to discuss how the overall structure of public schools within IPS boundaries could change. The first would give IPS control over all schools in its boundaries. IPS's publicly elected school board would act as a charter school authorizer, giving the district say over the opening and closures of all Indianapolis schools. The mayor's office of education innovation, a current authorizer, would become a place charter schools could appeal to if they disagreed with IPS's decision-making. This is the most democratic of the options. And as I give you the other 3, they will increasingly become more undemocratic. So under that first scenario, the district would also support facilities and transportation needs for all the schools. This model would likely bring the least transformative change to district schools and would keep tax dollars flowing through IPS. Now, the second idea would create an advisory board of IPS, mayor, and charter school appointees. This new appointed board would receive property tax dollars to distribute among schools for transportation and facilities needs. The board would also oversee charter schools. Existing roles like the IPS school board and the Office of Education Innovation would still exist, but they would take their policy cues from the newly created board. Okay, so one step removed from democratic accountability. A third model would dramatically reshape the way Indianapolis schools are managed. It would create a new Indianapolis Education Authority made up of the mayor, an education secretary appointed by the mayor, and a 9-member policy-making board, also entirely appointed by the mayor. In this scenario, IPS would still exist, and 4 of its school board members would have seats on the overarching policy-making board, but the IPS school board would cede significant power to the city in this model. Specifically, the policy-making board would receive tax dollars and make decisions about transportation and facilities management. And a fourth option would place the mayor at the top of the organizational chart. The mayor would appoint all members of the IPS school board, which would then oversee all schools, independent charter and IPS-run buildings included. The fully appointed school board would oversee transportation and facilities and charter school authorizing. Simon, this stinks. Am I the only one that thinks this stinks?
Well, I'm looking at it going, some of those proposals should be under a Secretary of Education, which is a position they eliminated a few years ago. And then you've got to look at what actually charter schools are. So they're private corporations that come in to essentially take over what was a public school. And usually that private corporation gets to buy the school property for $1.
$1, yep.
Yeah, $1. So their accountability chain goes from very loosely to the local education authority to none whatsoever. If they can be put in a place that makes them accountable, that's a good idea. But should they even exist in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question, right?
Yeah, and the Republican supermajority got rid of the Secretary of Education from Indiana, specifically to allow charter schools to thrive and private schools to thrive at the expense of public schools. So I'm looking at these options and saying we can come up with better ideas than these.
I mean, the only option that is even remotely commensurate with democratic accountability is the first model.
Yeah, in one sense, but I would still want to put an accountability layer on top of that from the state level, because whatever you do in Indianapolis has to be as accountable as everywhere else in the state. Now you can put something together as a trial to figure out if it works or not, but everything there is being done inside the mayor's office. And if we look at this from another perspective, this would be like putting Pam Whitten under the Bloomington mayor. So do I think that's a good idea? I actually think that's a really good idea, because she needs to be held.
Well, somebody needs to rein her in, but that's not, I guess, neither here nor there.
Yeah. But I mean, from a statewide perspective, it needs to be held accountable at a statewide level, so that the services you get in South Bend and Gary and Bloomington and Indianapolis and Fort Wayne and LaPel, Indiana, and all the other small towns, they need to see the same accountability and the same equality in their educational systems. So, I mean, I'm all about making it work for whoever is essentially the last person that can make it to school. We've got to get them to school.
Yes. Tabitha, let me ask you. Like, now this is Indianapolis. This is Mayor Joe Hogsett. This is the city council there. These are Democrats largely. I am bothered by a certain faction of the Democratic Party getting in bed with these charter schools. Am I the only one that feels that way?
Well, look, right now, even if Indianapolis has more Democrats, right, that doesn't mean that it will always be that way. And so I think then making a system dependent upon essentially the mayor deciding all these different positions and putting people in position, if things were to shift, then who's to say what the next mayor will feel? As far as just transporting kids to schools in general, the farther you get out with the outliers, the more rural the area is, the longer the kids have to be on the bus. So, the public school system in general is the only way that these kids will be educated at all. And the more and more charter schools that you see, which, like I said, I'm sure some of them are great, right? But just in theory, if our goal is to make sure that all of these kids have access to education and to a good, consistent education, we need to make sure that, like Simon was saying, it's the example from Indianapolis is across the board throughout Indiana. And it doesn't matter if you have a school with 20 kids or if you have a school with 2,000.
Let me say this to the camera for any Democrat in the state of Indiana who's thinking about running for any office. If you want the support of this program, you will support fully funded, fully public education, and we need to scrap back every damn dollar of voucher money that the state's been giving away. I know it's a big lift, but it must be done. I need to move on.
Can I also just say real quick, though, Scott, we have examples around the world where if we want to actually put our money in action, maybe put some of these politicians and some of these school board members on a plane to Finland, right? And go to a system that is working and be like, listen, you know what? We want to see how you're doing things. Like consistently year after year, you're number one for education in the entire world. And we want our education system to reflect something like that. It doesn't have to be exactly that, but you already have a system that in the world is working. If, rather than throwing all this money around and thinking that we know best, why not just go to the horse, if you will?
Yeah.